Hello, people. This is Daily Up number 31, and today I want to talk about why you should escape the corporate world. So, first of all, I've been in big corporations and I've also been in startups. I've been in two big corporations, my last two jobs, and I've been in startups. Those were my first three jobs. And I gotta say, man, I recently quit my job, and one of the reasons was because I just realized that I wasn't made for the corporate world. Now, why is this? On a personal level, I'm someone that cares really about like the impact of your work. Sorry. So like I don't mind so much that the thing that I'm doing is like hard or easy, but more like how much impact does it have in like people's life, the organization, the world, the economy, whatever. And one thing that I realize about the corporations is that big corporations are like incredibly inefficient. And this is something that I don't think it's so much the fault of like any specific corporations, but more about the nature of them. Because say, when you have like one person, right, like say only you don't have to communicate to anybody, right? Like you're working on yourself. When you have a small team, you don't have that many communication channels, right? Like if you have three people, you literally have like three communication channels, right? Between one and two, two and three, and three and one. However, the more you start increasing this, it becomes not exponentially higher, but much higher, right? Like if you have four people, now you have one and two, one and three, one and four, two and three, two and four, three and four, and yeah, I think that those are and three and one. I don't know if I said it, but you get the idea. So you have many more channels of communication. So eventually you start needing managers, or like someone that takes the coordination job. And this is once again like pretty normal. Like even small companies, when you have like 10 people, you'll have this role. And I think that up to that point, and maybe like definitely less than 100 people, it makes a lot of sense to have these people in the role that they do and whatever. However, as corporations start growing and growing, you gotta start, I guess, from higher ups. They need to start abstracting things, right? So, for example, in a company where you're like, I don't know, say like 30 people, you can get by with just like three managers, right? And have like three teams of 10 people, and then the managers can communicate directly with the people, and, things is fine. But when you have like hundreds of peoples, the probability that the CEO is going to be able to talk directly with someone that's like the lowest level of worker, it's like increasingly smaller, or like decreasingly smaller. And what causes this? That creates what most people hate, which is middle management, right? Why middle management is so hated? It's because in the end, it's just bureaucracy. That's let's just say it how it is, because the actual guidance of the company comes from higher up. The execution is almost always the people below, and then you have this middle level, right? Middle management, which just like I guess takes the directions from higher up and then tries to coordinate the people lower down, So the work that these people do is not really, how to say it? It's weird to say it like this, it might sound harsh, but I guess it conveys better the meaning that I'm saying. They don't really do work, they just coordinate people that do the work, right? And they also don't really give the vision or like the direction of the company. They just take the direction from higher up and then coordinate downwards. Now, that being said, I do think that of course middle management is something that has to exist when you start growing a company to certain levels. I don't have a really like a number, like a specific number in mind. But the thing is that of course, like if you have 1,000 people, there's no way that you cannot have like middle management. So it's a necessary evil, one might say. But what I've seen in my experience is that this middle level is exactly the level that it's completely bloated, right? Like the amount of middle management that you see in big corporations is quite honestly like not necessary, not at least to the amount of people that they have, you know. And the thing is that these also sometimes like makes things really difficult to work with, because instead of talking directly to the guy that does the thing maybe in another apartment, you have to, sorry, department, you have to go not directly to his manager or her manager, but through your manager, so that your manager can talk to this manager, and then this manager can talk to this guy. So instead of you two like talking back and forth, you have to do this like weird shape where it's basically like playing telephone, and that's where things become really inefficient. Now, what's I guess take away from this analysis is that if that's the type of work that you like, if what you like is to actually coordinate people and all the time be in meetings and communicate with people, I guess coordinating efforts or circle back through things, because there's a lot of fluff in the corporate world, like in the language, people, they just throw buzzwords, they just circle around the same idea again and again, and a lot of the time it's wasting like presentations for people that don't really like the presentations, but the presentations gives visibility to the organization, and when you get visibility, that's when you can like go up. I guess if you like that kind of work, then go for a big corporation, go for the corporate world, might be made for you. But taking that out of the equation, I don't, and I do believe that most people do not want that type of work. I don't really think that it's worth it, because what's the other thing that I guess the corporate world gives you? Some people might say money, but honestly, like, we're in 2026. People have lost all the faith in corporations giving like decent wages. The wages usually are not really like good. They might be like slightly better than another smaller companies, but they are not really that good unless you go once again in management, and that's the one of the reasons why management is so bloated. Now, the other thing that some people might think about corporations is about job security, right? Like, of course, if you're in a smaller company, things happen much quicker and things change a lot. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't like. So that's why they stick to these like big corporations. And you know what? Like maybe in the short term, there's a certain truth to that, that if you're in a corporation, you will last longer than if you're in a small company, especially in like economic downtimes or like bad times. However, this is also an illusion, because what happens in corporations is that when they actually come to the point that it's like, okay, we need to fire people, they're not going to go one by one saying, oh, you were a good worker, you were a bad worker, you did your job, or you were slacking off. They're just going to fire the whole department. And that's one of the things that people don't see, And why is this like so bad? Especially for like new workers. And once again, like I'm a software engineer, so I'm talking from my bias of the tech world, especially here in Chile. However, I've also been in corporations, like international ones. But why do I personally think that this is a bad career choice, especially for your early years? It's because in your early years in career, that's when you learn the most, because you're new to things, right? So you're like a sponge, just like, kids learn the fastest. I think that new workers are also the ones that learn the fastest. And they actually pay attention to a lot of the things, when you already have some experience like me, you get into a corporation and you know how to ignore some things. I remember the first job experience that I've ever had was in Facebook. And I was like reading all the documents, trying to memorize all the things. And now, in my last job when I entered, I was like, okay, this is probably the garbage information that I just need to ignore. And guess what? I never read some things, I never went to some meetings, and there was no problem with my job. So what I'm saying is that your early years is where you learn the most. And in these early years, if you go to a big corporation, you will still learn a lot, but you will learn a lot about these corporations. And because of what I said at the beginning of this video, a lot of the work around these corporations is just bureaucracy. So yeah, you do learn a lot, but you learn what? How to like do good presentations, how to communicate with other leaders, through like the official channels, how to move processes that are way too slow for what they are, Like that's the thing with corporations, they move really slow on the big picture. It seems like there's always work, but that's once again because it's so bloated with people that are not really necessary to the work that they have to justify their work, so they create work to justify their own existence. This happened to me. I had like a really incompetent, there's no other way to put it, boss, but because she created meetings, because she was always like talking into presentations, it looked like she was doing something when in reality she was doing nothing, and all of the workers knew that. However, when it comes to, from the eyes of management or like upper management, it looked like she was doing something when it was really like nothing. And that's why I would advise against, because sure, you might get like really good at the organization, and if you plan on doing like career into the corporate world, specifically in the company that you get into, then okay, maybe all of that I'm saying is invalid. However, I feel like most people my age and younger don't really believe in that, because companies are just going to fire you eventually. But you start learning things that are not really useful, and that's the thing. I have, like, I recognize I have an engineering bias. I'm an engineer, so I care about impact. I care about things that work and that matter, not about the fluff that comes from like, oh, presentations or like, I don't know, marketing or things like that, and it's so staggering to see the difference between startups, where almost everything that you do is something that's going to be, going to production, that's going to matter, that's not going to be just forget about. And you compare that to corporations, where a lot of the times you have to do work or like have to do things just because it's the way that it's been done in the corporation, not because it really matter or adds value to the business. And honestly, man, I feel like if you waste those first years, then you are really like, I mean, you're fighting an uphill battle. And this is really noticeable. Once again, like, this is not just my like ideas, but I've seen it. Like when you see people that started in startups and they move to corporations, almost always the perception of them is like, oh my god, they are so great, they work so fast. That definitely happened with me. Like, he's so proactive, because in startups or in smaller companies, you learn to do the things that matter, so you kind of have like that mindset when you go into a big corporation. And I've seen it the other way. I've seen it, people that come from big corporations, they're so used to like the rituals, the meetings, the processes, the let's circle back through these, and like, you know useless things like that, that when they get into startups, they feel a lot of times overwhelmed. And I'm not saying that they fail, they can adapt. But what would you rather, to like start in a harsh environment and then move to some place that feels easier, or start in an easier one and then move to a place where, when you're already like 5 years into your career, you have to relearn a lot of things. There's even like a meme I saw the other day that said like, oh, like a startup hire like a FANG engineer, so that's like Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google engineer. And they were like really excited because, oh, he comes from a big company, he must be really good. And then in the meme it said like, oh yeah, I finished this, now you just have to like give it to the DevOps so that he can deploy. And the people at the startup were like, what do you mean, like there's no DevOps, you do that yourself? And he was like, what, am I expected to do like back and front and DevOps? So basically like do the whole thing from start to finish. And I guess that's a place that if you want to be a good professional, you shouldn't be in. And once again, I'm talking mainly about the tech sector, because I do know that for other careers, for example, like lawyer and maybe like construction engineer, it must be really different. Maybe corporations are actually the best places to learn. But once again, going into like the tech part, honestly, man, in corporations, I always felt like my job didn't matter that much. And once again, for some people, that's like perfectly fine, because at the end of the day, they just want to, check in, check out, and then get their paycheck. But if you're one of those people, that really want to make something that's useful, something that matters, I would really advise against going into one of these big corporations and avoid them for a long time. Maybe when you want to like quote unquote settle down, you're like, okay, you know what, like I'm fine now, I can finally not make job my main thing, or I want to focus on family, or I want to focus on other things, I want to just live my life and clock in and clock out. Please do. Corporations are actually great for that, because once you get used to it, you become like kind of important, just because the bureaucracy and the ways around in the corporation. But man, at least I know that that wasn't it for me. I need to do something that I feel like makes sense. But anyway, it's already been a long daily job, so I'll see you guys another day. Goodbye.